Melodies of the heart. Rose Udale clutched her carpetbag tighter as the train rumbled through the vast Nebraska prairie. The endless sea of grass swayed beneath the afternoon sun, so different from the crowded streets of St. Louis she'd left behind. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching her breath form a small cloud of condensation that quickly disappeared. Just like her old life. "Next stop, White Oak," the conductor called, moving through the passenger car. Rose straightened her plain blue traveling dress, a far cry from the spangled costume she'd worn at the Silver Dollar. She touched the simple gold band on her left hand, a ring that legally bound her to a man she'd never met through a proxy marriage. Brent Keller, widower, father of 4, farmer. The sum total of what she knew about her new husband could fit on a calling card. The letter she'd received in response to her advertisement had been straightforward, almost businesslike. He needed a mother for his children after his sister's upcoming marriage would leave them without care. He offered respectability, a home, and food on the table. It was more than Rose had dared hope for when she'd placed the advertisement in the newspaper. A fresh start, a chance to be someone else. The train slowed with a screech of metal against metal. Rose gathered her belongings, which included a carpet bag containing everything she'd chosen to bring from her old life. Through the window, she could see a small cluster of wooden buildings that constituted White Oak. A water tower, a general store, and what appeared to be a church steeple in the distance. And people, not many, but enough, were waiting on the platform. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Which one was Brent Keller? Would he be disappointed when he saw her? Would he somehow know what she'd been, what she'd done? The train lurched to a complete stop. Rose took a strong breath, squared her shoulders, and made her way to the exit. The porter helped her down the steps, and suddenly she was standing on Nebraska soil, the spring wind whipping at her skirts and tugging wisps of auburn hair from beneath her bonnet. A tall man stepped forward from the small crowd. His face was weathered from the sun, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting in the bright sunlight. He had dark brown hair, which was in need of a trim and curled slightly at his collar. He removed his hat, revealing a streak of premature gray at his temple. "Mrs. Keller?" he asked, his voice deep but hesitant. Rose braced herself, not trusting her voice at the reminder of her new last name. "I'm Brent." He awkwardly extended his hand, then seemed to think better of it and dropped it back to his side. "Welcome to White Oak." Standing behind him were 4 children, arranged almost in order of height, like steps on a staircase. The oldest, a girl of perhaps 12 or 13, had her father's dark hair and a scowl that could curdle milk. Beside her stood a boy of about 10, thin and serious. The 2 younger children, another boy and the smallest, a girl with blonde curls, partially hid behind their siblings. "These are my children," Brent said, gesturing toward them. "Holly, Jacob, Samuel, and little Hannah." Holly's scowl deepened at the introduction. She stared at Rose with undisguised hostility, her eyes flicking to the carpetbag, the simple dress, and back to Rose's face, as if cataloging all the ways this stranger failed to measure up. "It's a pleasure to meet you all," Rose said, finding her voice at last. She smiled, trying to project a warmth she didn't feel through the icy knot of anxiety in her stomach. None of the children returned the smile. "We should get home before dark," Brent said, reaching for her bag. "The wagon's this way." As they walked toward a weathered farm wagon hitched to 2 horses, Rose felt the stares of the townspeople boring into her back. She heard whispers catching fragments. "Mail order bride." And, what was he thinking? The oldest girl, Holly, fell into step beside her. "My mother's been gone 2 years," she said, her voice low and clipped. "No one can replace her." Before Rose could respond, the girl quickened her pace, rejoining her siblings, who were already climbing into the wagon. Brent helped Rose up to the wooden seat beside him, seemingly oblivious to the exchange that had just occurred. As the wagon pulled away from the station, Rose stole a glance at her new husband's profile. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. She wondered what thoughts were moving behind those guarded eyes. Was he already regretting his decision? The wagon rumbled past the last buildings of town, onto a rutted dirt road that stretched across the prairie. In the distance, Rose could see a farmhouse and barn, silhouetted against the setting sun. "That's home," Brent said, following her gaze. The first real information he'd volunteered since her arrival. "It's not much, but the land is good." Rose was suddenly overwhelmed by the finality of what she'd done. There was no going back now. This land, this man, and these children who already resented her. This was her life now. She squared her shoulders again and lifted her chin. She'd survived worse, much worse, and perhaps if she was very lucky, she might even find something here she'd never truly had before. A belonging. The farmhouse was larger than it had appeared from a distance. It was a 2-story structure with a wide porch that wrapped around one side. Weathered clapboard, once white, had faded to a soft gray that blended with the twilight sky. A large cottonwood tree stood sentinel in the yard, its new spring leaves whispering in the evening breeze. Brent helped Rose down from the wagon, his touch brief and impersonal on her elbow. "Jacob, help your brother with the horses," he instructed. The boy then led the younger children toward the barn. Holly remained, watching Rose cautiously. "Holly, show Mrs. Keller to her room," Brent said. "She'll want to freshen up before supper." "Mrs. Keller was my mother," Holly said flatly. Brent's jaw tightened. "Holly." The girl's shoulders slumped. "Yes, Pa." She turned to Rose, not quite meeting her eyes. "This way." Rose followed Holly into the house, acutely aware of the tension radiating from the girl's rigid back. The interior was tidy but sparse. There was functional furniture, simple curtains, and a few books on shelves. They were signs of a household managed for practicality rather than comfort. "Aunt Margaret's been keeping house since Ma died," Holly said as they climbed the stairs. "But she's marrying Mr. Peterson from the Mercantile next month, so Pa had to find someone else." The accusation in her tone was unmistakable. At the top of the stairs, Holly pushed open a door. "This is your room." "Yours and Pa's." Her cheeks colored. "I'll let you settle in." Rose stepped into the bedroom, aware that this was likely where Brent had shared with his first wife. A large bed dominated the space, covered with a patchwork quilt of blues and reds. A bureau stood against one wall, a washstand in the corner. It was simple and functional, like the rest of the house. "Thank you, Holly," Rose said, setting her carpet bag on a wooden chair. The girl hovered in the doorway. "Supper's at 6. She turned to go, then paused. "My mother made that quilt. She was very good with a needle." Before Rose could respond, Holly was gone, footsteps retreating down the hallway. Rose sat heavily on the edge of the bed, allowing herself a moment of doubt. What had she expected? A warm welcome? Open arms? She'd known it would be difficult, especially for the children, but the reality of their grief and resentment was more than she'd anticipated. She opened her carpet bag and removed a small hand mirror, studying her reflection. At 28, she was younger than Brent, but old enough, she hoped, to command respect as a stepmother. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical knot, her green eyes clear and direct. The years of the silver dollar had taught her to hide vulnerability behind a mask of confidence. That skill would serve her well now. From downstairs came the sounds of the family returning. She heard boots on the floorboards, children's voices, and the clatter of cooking. Rose changed into a fresh dress, brushed her hair, and pinched her cheeks for color. Taking a hopeful breath, she descended to join her new family. The kitchen was warm and filled with savory aromas. A woman Rose hadn't seen before, presumably Brent's sister Margaret, stood at the stove, stirring a pot of stew. The children were setting the table, showing her they were used to this particular chore. "There you are," Margaret said, looking up with a curt smile. "I'm Margaret, Brent's sister. I'm just getting supper on before I head home. You'll be taking over tomorrow, I expect." "Yes, of course," Rose said. "Thank you for all you've done for the family." Margaret's smile tightened further. "They're my family, too, and have been all my life." She turned back to the stove. "Brent is washing up. He'll be in shortly." Rose stood awkwardly, unsure where to position herself in this established household. Hannah, the youngest, stared at her openly from behind the safety of Jacob's leg. The middle boy, Samuel, dropped a spoon and quickly retrieved it, his eyes darting to Rose as if expecting criticism. "Can I help with anything?" Rose asked. "We have our ways of doing things," Holly said, placing the last fork on the table with deliberate precision. "Holly," Margaret admonished gently, "mind your manners." The front door opened and Brent entered, his hair damp from washing. "It smells good, Maggie," he said, hanging his hat on a peg. He gestured to Rose almost as an afterthought. "I hope you found everything satisfactory upstairs?" "Yes, thank you," Rose replied, forcing a smile. They gathered around the table, an awkward tableau of unresolved relationships. Brent cleared his throat. "We'll say grace." They bowed their heads as he recited a simple prayer of thanks. Supper was a mostly silent affair, interrupted by requests to pass dishes and Margaret's occasional attempts at conversation. Rose learned that Brent's farm primarily grew wheat, with some corn and vegetables for their own use. The nearest neighbors were the Hansons, about a mile east. Church services were held every Sunday in town. Mrs. Keller, Jacob said suddenly, the first time any of the children had directly addressed her, "Do you know how to cook?" "Jacob," Brent warned. "It's all right," Rose said. "Yes, Jacob, I can cook." "Perhaps not the same dishes you're used to, but I'm a quick learner." "Ma made the best apple pie in the county," Samuel volunteered. "She won ribbons at the harvest fair." "I'm sure she did," Rose said softly. "My sister Edith was very accomplished," Margaret added. "She played the piano at church, made all the children's clothes, and still found time to tend her garden. The women in town still use her pickle recipe." Rose felt each achievement like a small stone added to a wall being built between her and acceptance. The first Mrs. Keller, Edith, she'd learned from Brent's letters, had clearly been beloved, accomplished, and irreplaceable. "I play piano," Rose said, the words escaping before she could reconsider. 5 pairs of eyes turned to her in surprise. "And I sing." "I could teach you if you'd like," she added, looking at the children. "Ma tried to teach me piano," Holly said, "but I never took to it." "Well, the offer stands," Rose said, meeting the girl's gaze steadily. "For any of you." After supper, Margaret departed, promising to return the following day to help Rose learn the household's routines. Brent took the boys outside for evening chores, and Holly disappeared upstairs with Hannah, leaving Rose alone in the kitchen. She rolled up her sleeves and began washing the dishes, finding comfort in the familiar task. Through the window, she could see Brent in the yard, his tall figure silhouetted against the last light of day as he spoke with his sons. They were strangers still, bound by a contract and little else. But as Rose washed the plates that would now be hers to fill each day, she made a silent promise to herself. She would find her place here. She would earn their respect, if not their love, and she would never, ever let them discover the truth about the woman who had come to be their new mother. Rose awakened before dawn, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling above her. Beside her, Brent slept facing away, a respectful distance maintained between them. Their wedding night had consisted of awkward pleasantries and Brent's gentle explanation that he expected their marriage to grow into something more than convenience, but he was willing to wait until they knew each other better. She'd been simultaneously relieved and unsettled. In her former life, men's intentions had rarely been so honorable or patient. Rose slipped quietly from the bed, dressed in the dim light, and made her way downstairs. If she was to be the mistress of this household, she would begin, as she meant to go on, with competence and determination. The kitchen stove was cold. Rose built a fire, pleased to find her hands remembered the skill from childhood. By the time she heard movement upstairs, she had coffee brewing and biscuit dough mixed. Not Edith Keller's blue ribbon recipe, perhaps, but her own mother had taught her to make a decent biscuit before life had taken its unexpected turns. Brent appeared first, pausing in the doorway as if surprised to find her there. "Good morning," he said, reaching for his hat before remembering he was indoors. His hand dropped awkwardly to his side. "You're up early." "I thought I should start as I mean to go on," Rose replied, sliding the biscuits into the oven. "Will eggs suit for breakfast?" "I found some in the basket by the door." "Yes, that's fine." He poured himself coffee. "I'll need to show you around today where everything is kept and what needs doing. Margaret will help with the household matters." "I'd appreciate that." She cracked eggs into a skillet. "I want to learn your ways." Brent nodded, studying her over the rim of his cup. "The children will be down soon. They're not used to changes." "I understand," Rose said. "I don't expect to replace their mother. I just hope to find my own place here." Something flickered in Brent's eyes. Was it gratitude, perhaps, or relief? He nodded again and moved toward the door. "I'll see to the animals before breakfast." As the day progressed, Rose received a whirlwind education in the running of the Keller household. Margaret arrived mid-morning, her manner professional if not warm, and guided Rose through the laundry schedule, cooking preferences, and where supplies were stored. The children were at school, giving Rose a brief reprieve from their watchful eyes. "Brent keeps the household accounts in his desk," Margaret explained, showing her a leather-bound ledger. "Edith used to note the egg money and garden sales here." She concentrated on the neat columns of figures in a feminine hand. She was very organized. "She sounds remarkable," Rose said sincerely. Margaret's expression softened. "She was." Brent was devastated when the fever took her. We all were. She closed the ledger with a snap. The children still miss her terribly. especially Holly. I've noticed, Rose said wryly. Holly and her mother were very close. She's old enough to remember clearly, unlike Hannah. Margaret hesitated. May I offer some advice? Please, don't try to be Edith. You'll never succeed and it will only cause resentment. Find your own way to be part of this family. The wisdom in those words resonated with Rose. Thank you. I'll remember that. In the afternoon, Brent showed her the farm. There were 160 acres with 40 currently under cultivation. The rest was pasture for the milk cow, 2 horses, and the dozen chickens that scratched in the yard. The barn was large and well built, with a small loft where hay was stored. The creek runs along the south boundary, Brent explained as they walked. It floods sometimes in spring when the snow melts, but it's never reached the house. He pointed to a line of trees in the distance. It runs in that direction. Good fishing there in summer. Rose tried to absorb everything, to understand this land that was now her home. It was beautiful in its way. There were vast open spaces, the endless sky above, and the promise of crops pushing through the soil, so different from the crowded, noisy world she'd left behind. May I ask you something, Brent? She said as they walked back toward the house. He looked surprised. Why did you choose me? From the responses to your advertisement. Brent was quiet for several steps. Your letter was honest, he finally said. You didn't pretend to be something you weren't. You said you wanted a fresh start, that you had no family but were willing to care for mine. He glanced at her. And you mentioned music. Edith loved music. I thought perhaps the children might respond to that. The mention of her letter made Rose's heart beat faster. She had been honest to a point. She'd mentioned leaving a position at a gentleman's establishment in St. Louis, implying work as a housekeeper rather than a dance hall girl who occasionally did much more when funds were low. She'd emphasized her musical abilities, downplayed her lack of family or connections. A partial truth was better than none, she'd reasoned. I hope I won't disappoint you, she said quietly. Brent's expression was unreadable. We all have pasts, Mrs. Keller. What matters is the future we build. The use of her married name, Mrs. Keller, sent a strange shiver through Rose. It was a name she had no right to, perhaps, but one she was determined to honor. When the children returned from school, they regarded Rose warily, as if expecting her to have changed their home in their absence. Holly immediately disappeared upstairs, but the younger 3 lingered in the kitchen, watching as Rose prepared supper under Margaret's guidance. Do you know any stories? Hannah asked suddenly, her small voice startling in the quiet kitchen. Rose turned from the stove. I know many stories. Would you like to hear one? Hannah smiled. After supper, perhaps, Rose suggested, when the chores are done. To her surprise, all 3 younger children appeared in the sitting room after the dishes were washed. Even Holly hovered in the doorway, pretending indifference but clearly listening, as Rose began a tale about a clever rabbit who outwitted a fox. This small moment of connection wasn't much, but as Rose looked at their attentive faces in the lamplight, she felt a tentative hope unfurl within her. Perhaps with time and patience, she might find her place in this family after all. Later, as she prepared for bed, Rose noticed a small upright piano in the corner of the sitting room that she'd overlooked in the chaos of arrival. She lifted the lid, running her fingers silently over the keys. Edith used to play in the evenings, Brent said from behind her. She hadn't heard him enter. It's been silent for 2 years. Rose turned to find him watching her, his expression softer than she'd yet seen it. Would it bother you if I played? He shook his head. No, it might be good for the house to have music again. As Rose followed him upstairs, she realized it was the first time he'd referred to something she might bring to the family, rather than what had been lost with Edith's passing. A small victory, but one she would cherish as she navigated the delicate path ahead. Over the next 2 weeks, Rose settled into the rhythm of farm life. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, saw Brent and the children off to their respective duties, and spent her days learning to manage the household that was now her responsibility. The work was hard but straightforward. She did laundry, cooking, and cleaning. She also tended the kitchen garden that was beginning to show the first green shoots of spring. Margaret visited less frequently as Rose gained confidence, though she sometimes stayed longer to work on Holly's bridesmaid dress. These sessions were conducted in frigid silence, with Holly responding to Rose's attempts at conversation with minimal politeness. The younger children were gradually warming to her. Hannah had taken to following Rose around the house, helping with tasks in her 5-year-old way. Samuel had revealed a surprising interest when Rose mentioned knowing how to play checkers. Jacob remained reserved but had stopped watching her as if she might poison their food. Brent, too, was slowly unbending. Their conversations, while still largely practical, occasionally touched on more personal matters. He told her about his journey west from Pennsylvania after the war, how he'd built the farm from raw prairie. She shared carefully edited stories from her childhood in Kentucky, before her parents' deaths had set her on the path that eventually led to the silver dollar. One evening, after the children were in bed, Rose finally gave in to the temptation that had been growing since she'd discovered the piano. She sat on the bench, flexed her fingers, and began to play. The instrument was out of tune, but the familiar action of keys beneath her fingers brought a comfort she hadn't realized she'd been missing. She began with a simple hymn, one she remembered from childhood Sundays. The notes filled the quiet house, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. She was so absorbed in the music that she didn't notice Brent had entered the room until she finished the piece. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. Rose turned, startled. "I hope I didn't disturb you?" "No." He moved closer. "It's good to hear it again." He hesitated. "Edith played that hymn too." "I can play something else," Rose offered. "No, please. It's a good memory." Brent sat in a chair near the piano. "What else do you know?" Rose smiled and launched into a lively folk tune. Her fingers remembered the countless nights of the silver dollar, playing for rowdy crowds. She was careful to choose the more respectable pieces from her repertoire, but she couldn't entirely disguise the professional quality of her playing. Brent watched her, his expression thoughtful. "You play very well? Where did you learn?" "My mother taught me the basics," Rose said, which was true, "and I worked at an establishment in St. Louis where I played for guests." Also true, if incomplete, she also added to herself, "You must have been quite good to be hired for such a position." Rose's fingers faltered on the keys. It was a living. "I'm sorry," Brent said. "I didn't mean to pry." "It's all right. It's natural to be curious about the stranger you've married." Brent was quiet for a moment. "You're not quite a stranger anymore." The simple statement warmed something in Rose's chest. "No, I suppose not." Later that night, as they prepared for bed in their now familiar routine of careful privacy, Brent surprised her by saying, "The children enjoyed your playing?" "I heard Hannah singing the tune afterward." "Did they?" Rose couldn't keep the pleasure from her voice. "I'd be happy to teach them if they're interested." "I think they might be. Even Holly used to enjoy music, though she hasn't touched the piano since." He didn't finish the sentence. Rose smiled. "I understand. I won't push. But the offer stands." Brent extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. In the shadows, his voice came softer than she'd yet heard it. "Thank you, Rose, for your patience with all of us." It was the first time he'd used her given name. Rose lay awake long after his breathing had deepened into sleep, that single word echoing in her mind. The next morning, she found Hannah waiting by the piano before school. "Pa says you might teach us to play," the little girl said, her blonde curls catching the early sunlight. Rose smiled, kneeling to the child's level. "I'd love to." "Would you like that?" Hannah acknowledged solemnly. "Mama played pretty songs, but I don't remember them very well anymore." The simple admission clutched at Rose's heart. "We can learn new songs together. And perhaps I can teach you some of the ones your mama might have known." "Could we start today?" "After school?" "Of course." True to her word, Rose gave Hannah her first piano lesson that afternoon. Samuel joined them, his curiosity overcoming his reserve. Even Jacob lingered nearby, pretending to read but clearly listening. Only Holly remained distant, watching from the doorway with an expression Rose couldn't decipher, before disappearing upstairs. That evening, after the children were in bed, Rose was tidying the sitting room when she noticed a small wooden chest partially hidden beneath Edith's desk. Curiosity prompted her to kneel and draw it out. The lid opened easily to reveal a stack of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. Rose hesitated, knowing she was intruding on something private, but a name caught her eye on the top envelope: Edith Keller. She found herself carefully untying the ribbon. The letter was dated just a few weeks before Edith's death, addressed to someone named Catherine in Chicago. "Dearest Kathy, I've made my decision. When Brent takes the children to the spring market in Lincoln, I will leave. I've set aside enough from the egg money for train fare. I cannot bear another winter, another year, of pretending this life is enough. The children will be better with him than with me. He's a good father, if a distant husband. Perhaps in time he will find someone better suited to this life than I have been. Don't tell Richard of my plans yet. I'll write when I've arrived. Your devoted sister, Edith. Rose's hands trembled as she refolded the letter. She quickly looked through the others. There were several more addressed to this Catherine, all expressing similar sentiments. Unhappiness, isolation, a growing determination to leave. She hastily retied the ribbon and returned the box to its hiding place, her mind racing. Edith had been planning to abandon her family. Did Brent know? The children? The thought of Holly's fierce defense of her mother's memory now took on a different dimension. What are you doing? Rose started violently, nearly overturning an oil lamp. Holly stood in the doorway, her young face hard with suspicion. Just tidying up, Rose said, trying to keep her voice steady. I didn't hear you come down. Holly's eyes flicked to the desk, then back to Rose. Those are my mother's things. I know. I'm sorry if I overstepped. The girl's chin lifted. You can never replace her. Never. I'm not trying to, Rose said gently, rising to her feet. Holly, I know how much you miss her. You don't know anything about us. Holly's voice cracked. About her. Rose hesitated, wondering if the girl was aware of her mother's plans. The desperate defense of Edith's memory suggested not. You're right. I don't know as much as you do, but I would like to learn, if you'd let me. Holly's expression wavered for a moment, vulnerability bleeding through the hostility. Then she turned and fled back upstairs, leaving Rose alone with the weight of a secret she hadn't sought. That night, as Brent slept beside her, Rose stared into the darkness, troubled by her discovery. Should she tell him? Was it her place to reveal this truth about his first wife? And what about the children, especially Holly, who clung so fiercely to her mother's memory? The letter had shown her something else as well, a glimpse into Brent's first marriage that cast their own arrangement in a new light. Edith had called him a distant husband. Was that still true? Would Rose eventually find herself as isolated and unhappy as Edith had been? She turned her face toward Brent's sleeping form, studying what she could see in the faint moonlight from the window. In sleep, the careworn lines of his face softened. He was a handsome man, though he seemed unaware of it. Kind in his way, if reserved. A good father, as Edith had acknowledged. What kind of husband would he be to her, Rose wondered, if she could somehow breach the walls of grief and guilt that surrounded him? And what would he think of her if he knew the full truth of her past? These questions followed her into uneasy dreams, where she searched endless prairie for something lost, the sound of piano music always just beyond the horizon. April brought warmer days and increasing concern about the creek that bordered the Keller farm. Heavy winter snows in the mountains were melting, and Brent often rode out to check the water levels, usually returning with a concerned look. The Hansons say it's the highest they've seen in years, he told Rose one evening as they sat at the kitchen table after the children were in bed. It had become a small ritual between them. These quiet conversations over cups of tea, planning the next day's work, and occasionally sharing more personal thoughts. Is there danger to the farm? Rose asked, warming her hands on her cup. Not usually. The house and barn are on high ground. Brent rubbed his jaw, the scrape of calloused fingers against stubble audible in the quiet kitchen. But if it gets much higher, we might lose some of the lower fields. The wheat's just starting to come up there. Rose understood the worry. Their livelihood depended on those crops. What can we do? Not much except watch and wait. I've got some sandbags ready if needed. He gave her a small smile. The Kellers have weathered floods before. We'll manage. The casual use of we sent a warm current through Rose. After nearly a month, she was beginning to feel like a true part of the household, if not yet the family. The children, except Holly, had adjusted to her presence. Hannah loved her piano lessons. Samuel had shyly asked for help with his reading. Even Jacob had grudgingly admitted she made better biscuits than Aunt Margaret. Brent, too, was changing toward her. The careful distance he'd maintained was gradually diminishing. Their conversations came more easily. Occasionally his hand would brush hers when passing a dish at supper, and neither would pull away quite as quickly as before. They still maintained their separate sides of the bed, but sometimes Rose would awaken to find Brent watching her, an unreadable expression in his eyes, before he would turn away, mumbling an apology. The discovery of Edith's letters remained a weight on Rose's conscience. Each time she made progress with the children or shared a moment of connection with Brent, guilt would follow. They were building something on a foundation of half-truths of her concealed past and Edith's hidden unhappiness. The opportunity to confess came unexpectedly the following evening. Brent found Rose in the sitting room, playing the piano softly, while the children worked on their schoolwork at the table. "That's pretty," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "What's it called?" "Lorena," Rose replied, finishing the melancholy Civil War ballad. "It was popular when I was younger." "I remember it from the war," Brent said. "The boys in my regiment used to sing it around the campfire." Rose turned on the bench. "You never mentioned you fought in the war." "I sure did. 3 years with the Pennsylvania 83rd. Nothing heroic, just a lot of marching and waiting and some fighting I'd rather forget." "Is that why you came west afterward?" "To forget?" A shadow crossed his face. "Partly. The farm I grew up on seemed too small after seeing so much of the country, and Pennsylvania held too many ghosts." He straightened. "Would you walk with me?" "I need to check the creek again before dark." Rose was surprised by the invitation. She fetched her shawl, and they set out across the farmyard toward the line of trees that marked the creek boundary. The evening was cool, but pleasant, the setting sun painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. "Holly seems to be doing better in school," Brent said as they walked. "Her teacher mentioned it when I was in town yesterday." "I'm glad to hear it," Rose said. "She's very bright." "Like her mother," Brent said reflexively, then glanced at Rose. "I'm sorry." "I shouldn't always be comparing." "It's natural," Rose assured him. "Edith was their mother for many years. My feelings aren't hurt when you remember her." Brent was quiet for several steps. "It's not just remembering," he finally said. "It's the guilt." "Guilt? For remarrying?" He shook his head for not seeing how unhappy she was. For not being the husband she needed. Rose's heart quickened. Did he know about the letters? "What makes you think she was unhappy?" Brent sighed heavily. "A thousand small things I only recognized after she was gone. The way her smile never looked sincere in those last months. How she stopped playing the piano and stopped singing to the children. I was too busy with the farm to really see what was happening right in front of me." They reached the creek, which was indeed higher than Rose had seen it before. The water rushed brown and turbulent between the banks. "Brent," she said carefully, "did Edith ever talk about leaving?" He turned to her sharply. "Leaving?" "No. Why would you ask that?" Rose hesitated, then decided truth was necessary, however painful. "I found letters." "In a box beneath her desk. I wasn't prying deliberately, but I saw them, and Brent, she was planning to leave. To go to her sister in Chicago." Brent stared at her, shock and disbelief warring in his expression. "That's not possible. Edith wouldn't have abandoned the children." "The letter suggested she thought they'd be better off with you." "That you were a good father?" Rose touched his arm gently. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have read them, and perhaps I shouldn't have told you." Brent pulled away, turning back toward the rushing water. His shoulders were rigid with tension. "Where are these letters?" "In the wooden chest under her desk, tied with a blue ribbon." He moved toward it, his back still to her. "I need to be alone for a while." "Of course." Rose hesitated, then added softly, "Brent, it doesn't change the fact that she loved the children." That much was clear in everything she wrote. He didn't respond, and after a moment Rose turned and walked back to the house alone. She'd done what she thought was right, but the pain in Brent's eyes made her question her decision. Would this revelation drive him further away, just when they were beginning to find their way toward each other? Brent didn't return until well after dark. Rose heard him come in, but remained in bed, pretending to sleep when he finally entered their room. He moved quietly, but she could sense his restlessness. The next morning, Brent was gone before dawn. The children sensed the tension at breakfast, eating quickly and dispersing to their chores and school with minimal conversation. Rose went about her tasks mechanically, dreading Brent's return. But when he appeared at midday, his expression was calmer than she'd expected. He found her hanging laundry in the yard. "You were right," he said. "I read the letters." Rose lowered the sheet she'd been pinning to the line. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." "I needed to know." He looked past her toward the distant horizon. "All this time, I've been remembering a marriage that wasn't what I thought it was. People are complicated, Brent. It doesn't mean she didn't care." "No, but it means I failed her somehow." He met Rose's eyes directly. I don't want to make the same mistakes with you. The simple declaration caught Rose off guard. With me? This marriage may have started as a practical arrangement, but that doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Brent stepped closer. I've been holding back, comparing everything to what I had with Edith. But that wasn't even real in the end. What are you saying? Rose asked, her heart suddenly racing. I'm saying I'd like to try again. To be a better husband this time, to see the person in front of me instead of looking backward. He reached for her hand tentatively. If you're willing? Rose looked down at their joined hands, his large and work-roughened, hers smaller but equally marked by labor. I want that too, she admitted. But, Brent, there are things about my past you don't know. We all have pasts, he said, echoing his words from weeks before. It's the future I'm concerned with now. Before Rose could respond, a shout came from the direction of the creek. They turned to see Jacob running toward them, his face panicked. Pa! The creek's rising fast. Water's already in the lower field. Brent dropped Rose's hand, immediately alert. Get the sandbags from the barn. I'll hitch the wagon. He turned to Rose. This conversation isn't finished. But right now. Go, she said. I understand. As Brent and Jacob raced toward the barn, Rose hurried to the house to prepare for what might be a long day battling the flood. Whatever confession she needed to make would have to wait. For now, her place was with this family, facing whatever challenge came their way. The creek rose with alarming speed throughout the afternoon. Brent, Jacob, and Rose worked frantically to place sandbags along the lower edge of the wheat field, trying to divert the rushing water. By the time Holly returned from school with the younger children, water had already claimed the lowest corner of the field. Holly, take Hannah and Samuel to the house, Brent directed, his shirt soaked with sweat and creek water. Pack a bag each with essentials in case we need to leave quickly. Holly's eyes widened. Is it that bad? Just a precaution, Brent assured her, though his expression remained grim. The house should be safe, but I want to be prepared. As Holly herded the younger children toward the house, Rose and Jacob continued passing sandbags. The work was exhausting, but Rose matched Brent's movements, refusing to stop even when her arms ached, and blisters formed on her palms. You should go back with the children, Brent told her during a brief pause to drink from a water jug. Rose shook her head. I'm staying. This is my home too. Something flickered in Brent's eyes. There was surprise, followed by a warmth that had nothing to do with exertion. He returned to work without argument. By dusk, it was clear their efforts were only partially successful. They'd managed to protect most of the wheat field, but the water continued to rise, now threatening the lower pasture. We need to move the animals to higher ground, Brent decided as they trudged back to the house for a hasty supper. The barn should be safe, but if the water reaches it... We'll lose the hay stored there, Jacob finished, understanding the problem. And the equipment. Brent looked grim. After we eat, we'll move everything important to the house or the upper barn. The kitchen was warm and bright when they entered, a stark contrast to the gloomy twilight outside. Holly had a pot of beans and bacon with cornbread, and the younger children were already seated at the table, their faces solemn. Is the farm going to flood away? Hannah asked as they ate. No, sweetheart, Brent assured her. The house is on high ground. We'll be fine. But the crops? Samuel persisted. Brent exchanged a glance with Rose. We might lose some, but not all. And we can replant. After the meal, they worked by lantern light, moving the cow and horses to the highest part of the property, carrying tools and supplies from the lower barn to the house. The children helped without complaint, even Hannah lugging small bundles of Brent's papers and books from his office. Rose was struck by the calm cooperation of the family in crisis. The tensions and adjustments of the past month seemed temporarily forgotten as they worked together toward a common goal. Even Holly spoke to her without the usual wall of resentment. Where should I put these? The girl asked, holding a stack of Brent's ledgers. On the dresser in our bedroom, Rose directed. They'll be safe there. Holly headed upstairs without argument. When she returned, she hesitated before saying, Pa seems to trust you. With the farm and everything. I hope he does, Rose replied carefully. I want to help however I can. Holly studied her for a long moment. You work hard? Like Ma did. Before Rose could respond to this unexpected comparison, Brent called from outside and the moment passed. But something had shifted, however slightly, in the girl's demeanor. By midnight, they had done all they could. The creek continued to rise, but at a slower pace, so Brent insisted the children get some sleep, though he planned to keep watch on the water throughout the night. "I'll stay up with you," Rose said, as the children reluctantly went upstairs. "You don't have to?" "I know. I want to." They sat on the porch, watching the dark landscape where moonlight reflected off standing water in the lower fields. The night was eerily quiet except for the constant rush of the creek. "We'll lose about a quarter of the wheat," Brent said, breaking the silence. "Maybe more if the water doesn't recede soon." "Can you replant?" "Some of it. It'll mean a leaner winter, but we won't starve." He glanced at her. "I'm sorry this is happening so soon after you arrived." "It's not much of a welcome." "It's not your fault," Rose said, "and I'm glad I can help." Brent reached for her hand in the darkness. "You've been a godsend today. Jacob told me he didn't think you'd work so hard." Rose smiled wryly. "He thought a woman from the city would be useless in a crisis?" "Something like that." Brent squeezed her hand gently. "You proved him wrong." They sat in complete silence for a while, listening to the water and the occasional sounds from the barn where the animals were restless. "Brent," Rose said finally, "about what we were discussing earlier." He turned toward her. "Your past?" She paused to gather her courage. "I wasn't entirely truthful in my letter. When I said I worked at a gentleman's establishment in St. Louis, it was the Silver Dollar Dance Hall. I was a performer there." She felt him stiffen beside her but pressed on. "I played piano, yes, but I also sang and danced, and sometimes when money was particularly tight." She couldn't finish the sentence. Brent was silent for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I don't want any more secrets between us. After finding Edith's letters, I realized how destructive secrets can be." She tried to withdraw her hand, but he held on. "If you want to annul our marriage, I'll understand." "Is that what you want?" "No," she admitted quietly, "but I'd understand if you can't accept what I was." Brent was quiet again, his face unreadable in the darkness. "Did you ever kill anyone?" he finally asked. The question was so unexpected that Rose let out a small, startled laugh. "No." "Steal?" "Not significantly." She'd occasionally pocketed small items from clients who'd treated her poorly, but nothing of real value. "Deliberately hurt a child?" "Never." "Then you've got less to atone for than most men I fought alongside in the war, including me." Rose stared at him, unable to believe his reaction. "You're not disgusted?" "By what?" "That you survived however you could?" He turned to face her fully. "Rose, I've seen enough of life to know judgment comes easy to those who've never been desperate. I don't know what led you to the silver dollar, but I know the woman you are now. Hardworking, kind to my children, and brave enough to tell the truth when it would be easier to lie." He squeezed her hand again. "And that's the woman I'm coming to care for?" The simple declaration brought tears to Rose's eyes. "I don't deserve your understanding." "We rarely get what we deserve in this life, good or bad." Brent smiled. "Besides, I'm hardly a prize myself. A widower with 4 children and a farm that floods." Despite the tension of the night, Rose found herself smiling back. "I think you're undervaluing your stock, Mr. Keller." He reached out hesitantly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And I think you've been undervalued too long, Mrs. Keller." The tenderness in his touch made Rose's breath catch. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, but a crash from inside the house interrupted the moment. They both stood quickly. "That came from upstairs," Brent said, already moving toward the door. They hurried inside and up the stairs to find Holly standing in the hallway, outside the master bedroom, a small wooden chest at her feet. It was Edith's chest of letters, its contents now scattered across the floor. "Holly?" Brent approached his daughter cautiously. "What are you doing?" The girl's face was streaked with tears. "I heard you on the porch, talking about Mama's letters." Her voice trembled. "They're not true. She wouldn't have left us." Rose hung back, uncertain of her place in this family moment, but Brent motioned for her to stay. "Holly," he said gently, "come sit down. We need to talk." Holly allowed her father to guide her to the edge of the bed, but her body remained rigid with emotion. Rose hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to enter or leave them to their private grief. "Stay," Brent said softly, noticing her uncertainty. "Please." Rose then began to gather the scattered letters, giving father and daughter a moment before she joined them, sitting on Holly's other side. "I knew," Holly whispered so quietly they almost missed it, "about Mama wanting to leave." Brent stared at his daughter. "You knew?" "How?" "I found her writing a letter. She didn't see me." Holly's hands twisted in her lap. She was crying. "I heard her tell Aunt Eleanor on the porch that she couldn't stand another winter here." The girl's voice broke. "I thought it was my fault. That I wasn't good enough." "Oh, Holly." Brent wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "It was never about you or your brothers or Hannah. Your mother loved you more than anything." "Then why was she going to leave us?" The raw pain in the girl's voice cut through the room like a knife. Brent looked helplessly at Rose, clearly struggling for an answer. "Sometimes," Rose said carefully, "grown-ups can love their children with all their hearts and still feel lost themselves. It doesn't mean they love their children any less." Holly turned to her, tears streaming down her face. "But everyone always said what a perfect mother she was. How much she loved the farm, how happy we all were." "People often see what they expect to see," Rose said, "and sometimes we hide our true feelings because we don't want to disappoint those who love us." "I've been so angry at her," Holly confessed, "for wanting to leave. And then for dying before she could explain." She looked at Brent. "And I've been angry at you, Pa, for not seeing how sad she was. For bringing someone new to replace her." "I know," Brent said softly. "I've been angry too. At myself mostly for the same reasons. And at me," Rose added gently, "for not being her." Holly didn't deny it. "I didn't want to like you. It felt like betraying her." "You can love your mother and still accept me," Rose said. "I'll never try to take her place in your heart." The girl studied Rose with red-rimmed eyes. "You're not what I expected. When Pa said he'd sent for a bride, I thought you'd be—" She trailed off embarrassed. "Proper? Conventional?" Rose suggested with a small smile. "I'm certainly neither of those things." A ghost of a smile touched Holly's lips. "No, but you make Pa smile again. And Hannah adores you." "And what about you?" Rose asked softly. "Could you find room for me too? Not as a replacement for your mother, but as someone new who cares about you?" Holly was quiet for a long moment. "I could try," she finally said, "if you'll be patient with me." "I think I can manage that," Rose replied, her heart expanding with unexpected emotion. A crack of thunder punctuated the moment, startling them all. Brent moved to the window. "The storm's getting worse. I need to check the creek again." "I'll come with you," Rose said, rising. "Me too," Holly added. Brent looked as if he might object, but then consented. "Get your coat." "It's raining hard now." The three of them made their way downstairs, where they found Jacob already at the door, pulling on his boots. "I heard the thunder," he explained, "and thought you might need help." Brent clapped a hand on his son's shoulder. "Let's go, then." Together, the four of them ventured into the storm-lashed night. The rain fell in sheets, illuminated by occasional flashes of lightning. They made their way carefully to the ridge overlooking the creek, which had swollen further, water now rushing over the sandbags they placed that afternoon. "The lower field is gone," Brent said grimly, raising his voice over the storm. "But the house and main barn should still be safe." Another flash of lightning revealed the extent of the flooding. Nearly a quarter of their land was now underwater, the carefully planted wheat field a shallow lake. "All that work," Jacob said despondently. "We'll replant," Brent assured him. "The soil will be richer after the flood recedes." As they turned to head back to the house, a tremendous crash echoed from downstream. In the next lightning flash, they saw that part of the bank had collapsed, taking several trees with it. "The bridge!" Holly cried, pointing toward the small wooden structure that crossed the creek to the Hansons' property. The bridge was still standing, but debris from the collapsed bank was piling against its supports, forcing the water higher around it. "If that bridge goes, it could send a surge downstream toward the house," Brent said urgently. "We need to clear that debris." "How?" Jacob asked. "The current's too strong to wade in." Brent thought quickly. "We can use the wagon team. Hitch a chain to the largest logs and pull them free." "I'll get the horses," Jacob volunteered, already turning toward the barn. "Holly, go back to the house," Brent directed. "Check on Samuel and Hannah." For once, the girl didn't argue. She hurried back through the rain while Brent and Rose made their way to the bridge. Up close, the situation looked even more precarious. The bridge shuddered with each new tree branch that lodged against it. Jacob returned with the horses, and Brent quickly devised a plan. Using a long pole, he managed to loop a chain around one of the larger logs. Jacob would then drive the team to pull it free while Brent and Rose guided the operation from the bank. The work was dangerous and exhausting. Twice, Brent nearly lost his footing. The rain continued relentlessly, and the creek rose higher, but gradually they cleared the worst of the debris, easing the pressure on the bridge. As dawn approached, the storm began to abate. Holly had returned after checking on her siblings, and the four of them stood muddy and exhausted but triumphant. "We did it," Jacob said, a note of pride in his voice. "The bridge held." Brent surveyed the damage in the growing light. "We've lost a good portion of the crop, but the buildings are safe and so are the animals. We're luckier than many will be this spring." Rose looked around at their little group. Brent had his arm around Holly's shoulders, and Jacob led the tired horses. All of them were soaked to the skin. In that moment, despite the destruction around them, she felt a profound sense of belonging that had eluded her all her life. "Let's go home," Brent said, reaching for Rose's hand. "I think we've all earned a hot breakfast and dry clothes." They made their way back to the farmhouse where Samuel and Hannah were waiting anxiously on the porch. The younger children rushed to meet them, full of questions about the flood and the bridge. As they all crowded into the kitchen, shedding wet coats and boots, Rose caught Brent watching her across the room. His expression held something new. There was a warmth and certainty that made her heart beat faster. Later, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Brent found Rose at the piano playing softly. He sat beside her on the bench, their shoulders touching. "You were remarkable today," he said. "The whole family was." "It felt good," Rose admitted. "Working together like that." "It felt right," Brent corrected gently. He hesitated, then added, "When I sent for a mail-order bride, I was looking for a mother for my children. I never expected to find someone who would become so essential to all of us." "To me?" Rose's fingers stilled on the keys. "Brent, I know it's soon," he continued, "and we've had an unusual beginning. But these past weeks, especially today, Rose, I'm falling in love with you." The simple declaration brought tears to her eyes. "I never thought I'd hear those words from anyone. Least of all someone like you. Someone like me. Good. Honorable." She met his gaze directly. "Someone who knows the truth about me and cares anyway." Brent reached up to touch her cheek. "The past is past. It's who you are now that matters to me." This time, when he leaned toward her, there were no interruptions. His kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as she responded. When they finally parted, Rose felt as if something fundamental had shifted in her world. "When I came here," she said softly, "I was looking for safety. For a place to belong. I never expected to find love." "Neither did I," Brent admitted. "After Edith, I thought that part of my life was over. And now?" He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Now I think we should have a proper wedding. Not just a legal arrangement, but a celebration. With the children as witnesses. If you're willing." "I'd like that very much," Rose said, joy bubbling up inside her. "A fresh start for all of us." As Brent kissed her again, Rose knew there would still be challenges ahead. The farm would need to be rebuilt after the flood. The children would have difficult days as they continued to adjust. The town would take time to accept her fully, but for the first time in her life, Rose wasn't facing the future alone. She had found not just the safety she'd sought, but a family, a purpose, and a love she'd never dared to dream possible. The weeks following the flood were filled with hard work and gradual healing. The creek leisurely receded, leaving behind soggy fields and washed-out fences that required constant attention. Brent and Jacob spent long days replanting what they could of the wheat crop, while Rose and the younger children tended the kitchen garden and repaired minor damage to the house and yard. But alongside the physical rebuilding came an emotional one. The night of the flood had broken something open between them all. Holly, while still occasionally reserved with Rose, had stopped her active resistance. She even asked for help with a dress she was making for the end-of-term school celebration. One warm May afternoon, Rose sat on the porch mending a shirt of Brent's that had torn during fence repairs. Hannah played nearby with a rag doll Rose had made her, while Samuel practiced his letters at the small table Brent had built for the children's schoolwork. Rose? Samuel looked up from his slate. Can I ask you something? Of course, she replied, setting her sewing aside. Are you and Pa going to have a real wedding? Like Aunt Margaret's? The question caught her off guard. Why do you ask? Samuel shrugged. Holly said you should. That it would make things official. Rose smiled, touched by the unexpected support from her stepdaughter. Would you like that? If your father and I had a proper wedding? Samuel considered this seriously. Would there be cake? I imagine so, Rose laughed. Then yes. He returned to his letters, question answered to his satisfaction. Hannah looked up from her doll. Could I wear a pretty dress and flowers in my hair? The prettiest dress, Rose promised, and the loveliest flowers. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Rose recounted the conversation to Brent as they sat on the porch, enjoying the mild spring air. So it seems I'm the last to know about our wedding plans, he teased, taking her hand. Apparently Holly has been considering the matter, Rose replied, still surprised by this development. Brent paused thoughtfully. She came to me yesterday, actually. Said she thought we should do things properly this time, for the family's sake. And what did you say? That I was already planning to ask you. He squeezed her hand. Though it seems my children have beaten me to it. Rose leaned against his shoulder. I told them there would be cake, so you're committed now. Brent laughed, the sound still rare enough to delight her. Then I suppose we're having a wedding. When? The barn needs to be fully repaired first, Rose said practically. And the spring planting finished? 2 weeks then, Brent decided. That should give us time for preparations without being a distraction from the work. A flutter of anticipation warmed Rose's chest. 2 weeks? Word of the upcoming ceremony spread quickly through the small community. Margaret, now Mrs. Peterson, arrived the following day with fabric for a new dress for Rose and offers to help with preparations. To Rose's surprise, several women from town accompanied her, including the minister's wife and 2 others who introduced themselves as neighbors from farms further east. We thought you might appreciate some help, Mrs. Whitaker, the minister's wife, explained as they sat around the kitchen table. A wedding is no small undertaking. Rose had expected judgment or at least cool politeness from the townswomen. Instead, she found herself surrounded by helpful support and what seemed like genuine goodwill. The flood changed things, Margaret explained later when they had a moment alone. The way you worked alongside Brent and how you would take care of the children. People noticed. I was just doing what needed to be done, Rose said. Margaret smiled. Exactly. That's what farm wives do. Welcome to the sisterhood. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirl of activity. The women helped Rose sew a simple but elegant dress of pale blue cotton, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Holly overcame the last of her reluctance to participate fully in the preparations, and even offered to play the piano for the ceremony. It was a gesture that brought tears to Rose's eyes. Brent and the boys, meanwhile, worked to restore the barn to its former condition. The structure had suffered minimal damage during the flood, but Brent insisted on making improvements. He added a fresh coat of whitewash, repaired the roof, and added new planking for the floor where they would hold the celebration. It's looking more like a ballroom than a barn, Jacob commented one evening as they all inspected the progress. Good, Brent replied, surprising them. Your mother deserves a proper dance floor. Rose looked surprised. I didn't know you danced, Mr. Keller. A hint of color touched Brent's cheeks. There's still a few things you might not know about me, Mrs. Keller. The evening before the wedding, Rose sat at the piano while Hannah practiced the simple piece she'd learned for the ceremony. Holly watched from nearby, offering gentle corrections when her sister faltered. That's it, Rose encouraged as Hannah successfully completed the piece. You'll play beautifully tomorrow. Not as good as you or Holly, Hannah said, but she was smiling with pride. Different, not better or worse, Rose corrected gently. As Hannah skipped off to find her brothers, Holly lingered at the piano. Can I show you something? She asked. Of course. Holly opened the piano bench and removed a folded piece of paper. I found this among Mother's music books. I think she'd want you to have it. Rose accepted the paper carefully. It was sheet music for a song called Bright Morning Stars, written in a delicate hand that must have been Edith's. It was her favorite, Holly explained. She used to sing it to us at bedtime. The gesture, the sharing of something so personal from Edith's life, moved Rose deeply. Holly, are you sure? Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. That I can love my mother and still accept you. I think she'd want us to be happy, all of us. She hesitated, then added in a rush, and I think she'd like you. You're different from her, but you've made our house feel like home again. Rose blinked back tears. Thank you. That means more than I can say. Will you play it? Tomorrow, at the wedding? I'd be honored. The day of the wedding dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself approved of the celebration. Neighbors and townspeople began arriving mid-afternoon, bringing dishes for the supper that would follow the ceremony. The barn, transformed by whitewash and wildflowers, gathered by the children, filled with the community that had gradually come to accept Rose as one of their own. In the farmhouse, Rose dressed with Margaret and Holly's help. The blue dress fit perfectly, complemented by a crown of spring blossoms that Hannah had insisted on making for her. As Rose studied her reflection in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman who had stepped off the train just 2 months earlier. You look beautiful, Holly said softly from the doorway. Rose turned, smiling. Thank you. So do you. The girl smoothed the skirt of her new dress, a soft yellow that brightened her usually serious face. Pause waiting. Everyone's ready. Margaret squeezed Rose's hand. It's time. They made their way to the barn, where Brent stood waiting with the minister. Unlike their first proxy ceremony, this time Rose walked toward him, surrounded by their children. Samuel and Jacob flanked her proudly, while Hannah walked ahead, scattering flower petals with solemn concentration. Holly moved to the small portable organ that had been brought from the church, beginning a sweet, simple melody as Rose approached. Brent's face, as he watched her come toward him, held everything Rose had ever longed for but never expected to find. Admiration, respect, and most miraculously, love. This man who knew her past and accepted it. This man who had opened his home and heart when both were still wounded. The ceremony itself was brief but sincerely meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising not just fidelity and support, but understanding, patience, and the courage to build something new together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Brent kissed her with a tenderness that brought appreciative smiles from the gathered guests. As twilight approached, lanterns were lit in the barn, casting a warm glow over the celebration. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while the center space was cleared for dancing. After they had eaten, Brent surprised everyone by calling for music. My wife, he announced, the word carrying new weight now, is a gifted musician. I've asked her to play for us tonight. Rose moved to the piano, feeling a strange mixture of her past and present lives converging. She had played for audiences before, but never like this. Surrounded by people who knew and accepted her, with her husband and children watching proudly. She began with Bright Morning Stars, the piece Edith had written. The sweet, melancholy melody filled the barn, and Rose saw Holly wipe away a tear even as she smiled. Then, as the last notes faded, Rose transitioned into a lively folk tune. Brent stepped forward, extending his hand to her. May I have this dance, Mrs. Keller? As others took over the music, Brent led Rose to the center of the floor. He was, to her delight, an excellent dancer, guiding her confidently through steps she hadn't performed since her days at the Silver Dollar. Where did you learn to dance like this? She asked as he spun her skillfully. County fairs in Pennsylvania, he replied with a grin. Before the war, I had quite a reputation. Soon others joined them. Margaret and her husband. Neighbors, and eventually the children formed circles and lines across the barn floor. Rose watched as Holly taught Hannah a simple step, the older girl's face alight with a joy Rose hadn't seen before. As the evening progressed and younger children began to tire, Rose found herself standing with Brent at the barn door, looking out at the starlit farm. Are you happy? He asked, his arm around her waist. More than I ever thought possible, she admitted. When I came here, I was just hoping for safety. For a roof and meals and respectability. And now? Rose turned to face him, taking in the face that had become so dear to her. Now I have a home. A family. Love. She touched his cheek. You've given me far more than our agreement required, Brent Keller. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. And you've brought life back to this farm, Rose. To me, to all of us. From inside the barn came the sound of Holly playing a slow waltz on the piano, her first public performance since Rose's arrival. The sweet, slightly hesitant notes carried through the evening air. Shall we? Brent asked, offering his arm. As Rose allowed him to lead her back to the dance floor, She caught sight of all 4 children watching them. This was her family now. Not perfect, still healing, but bound together by choice as much as circumstance. As Brent drew her closer, Rose rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine that had become synonymous with home. The mail-order bride had found far more than she'd bargained for on the Nebraska prairie. She'd found herself at last.